Hello, I am June Prusak. I am deaf as well as a certified deaf interpreter. And today I want to be looking at the perspective of, from the perspective of a deaf consumer. Through personal experiences of using an interpreter, I have a lot of traumatic experiences. I would like interpreters to look at me from the perspective I am coming at as a deaf consumer. I am involved in the deaf community as well as the interpreting community. And I think it's time that the interpreting community have that larger and more of an understanding of the sensitivity, the knowledge, and responsibility that they have. Once interpreters are done and they think they understand it, they kind of put it in the back of their head, but it has to be revisited. As for the interpreter community, if I accept a job, or if you accept a job, kind of look at it, evaluate it, and evaluate yourself before you take that job. Do you have the receptive skills? Do you have the signing skills? Do you have the voicing skills? You have to take a look at those factors. It might have the deaf person's name on the job request form, and then again, take a look at that and say, should I be accepting this job? Interpreters have to constantly be analyzing and questioning themselves and their skills before they accept jobs. You might have the receptive skills and the signing skills, but you have to still think, do I have the receptive, signing, and voicing part to be equal for my consumer to show them and truly represent them as who they are? I fully believe that. Do you fully believe that you can understand your client? And do you know for a fact that your client will be able to understand you? Anyways, as for interpreting jobs, they can be a small job, a large job, short and sweet, or very long and rigorous. Either way, it doesn't matter. You have to treat each job with a serious thought process and analyzation. Thinking of the job's vocabulary that will be used. What is the topic about? The concepts brought up, emotions that might come up. Those are things that have to be analyzed for each and every job. Interpreters go in to a job, but they aren't taking it in the view of the deaf perspective for the deaf consumer. That person's life, they interpret and they don't understand that their interpretation can have an impact on them, whether it be positive or negative. And that's where that trauma comes from. You have to know the effect you will have on that person and how they will feel in that situation and be affected by that. When you show up to interpret and there's one deaf person at that moment, that precise moment, they are now your only goal to facilitate communication to the best of your ability. At that moment, it doesn't matter if you're happy or you're sad because you are there for them. And if you do that, you're taking away from why you're there, which is for them. Because now your receptive skills are missing, your signing skills are missing, your voicing skills are missing. And you're taking that away from your client, which is the reason why you're there. So my emotions have to match the situation. When you come to interpret and you match the client, that's great. But if you don't, you have to realize from that deaf consumer's perspective that the interpreter is coming into that person's personal life, this deaf person's personal life at that moment. And at any moment, there should always be given respect. And you have to allow the deaf person to say, you are being allowed to come into my world and look at my world through my view. So use that perspective in mind. Situations can be very challenging and hard and stressful. If an interpreter shows up late, you're already adding on to the stress that deaf client is feeling. They're already thinking about a list of things that could be happening in that situation, and then they add more stress when the interpreter shows up late. You have to be on time. Taking a look at the deaf consumer and how they view your professional clothes, you have to match the situation from head to toe. It has to be appropriate and match the scenario. Colors are important, but it should be what is opposite of your skin. If you have light skin, you should have dark clothes. If you have dark skin, you should have light clothes. And when you take a look at the deaf consumer's perspective, you understand why professionalism is so important. Another situation is an interpreter, when they accept a job and they read through the description, they decide to accept it. At that time, the name of the deaf client is showing up on the description and what the job entails. They can turn down a job depending on who the client is, but the deaf community doesn't know the reason why you're doing that. Oh, my mistake. The deaf client can turn down the job through your acceptance because they don't view you as a good interpreter. And with that, you cannot be offended or upset. Because why would you? You're just not a good match. So take a look at your perspective from the deaf clients. You can't be upset by their reasoning. When they don't want you as an interpreter, you have to understand maybe you need to do some self-analyzation to better improve your skills for next time. And the next time a deaf consumer turns you down. Is it your signing skills, your voicing skills, your receptive skills? Be looking at those. Setting that aside, as a deaf interpreter in this world, when you're called to a job, you should communicate needs, and say who needs you most. The one person that is stressing and the one person that is struggling with the communication, they might need you the most. You have to do more and give more. Finger spelling, what's the point behind it? Maybe you have to make it more visual, more gestural. Find the meaning behind what those words you're finger spelling are. And do that with signs. Show that meaning, because your client might be needing that. We, as the deaf audience, want very visual communication so the concepts are clear to understand. It lessens the stress on us, and it should lessen the stress on you as fearing that you are not doing it right. If there is an interpreting team of a deaf and hearing interpreter, there should be support between each other, and each should be there for each other because you're working together and having to figure out what your client needs together. You're a team. You have to be checking to see if the communication is there and accessible for the person. Once the job is done, discuss it with each other, take a debrief moment, see how either of you could have improved and what would happen next time. Sometimes the deaf and hearing team is very unequal, and taking a look at the deaf perspective, there's a lot of stress and fear the hearing interpreter thinks this person isn't needed, and it's very offensive towards the deaf interpreter. The goal of a deaf and hearing interpreting team is to become one, not seen as two interpreters, because that's when you can have the best communication and interpretation, as well as access for everyone in that room. So overall, the point is taking a look at the deaf consumer's perspective and a deaf interpreter's perspective. Interpreters have to be honest with themselves and have to take a look at their skills. How are my receptive skills? Am I getting this? How are my voicing skills? Are they fine? Am I saying the wrong things? How are my signing skills? Are they clear enough? Are these correct sign choices? Are concepts being displayed correctly? Taking a look at themselves, you have to be honest. And think about that every time you accept a job. Imagine your client. What's the meaning behind the job? What's the scenario going to be like? What will the emotional aspects that arise from it be? If you're a little hesitant with it, but think, oh, that's no big deal, I'm going to go ahead and try it. Do not. You should turn down that job. If you have that hesitant, awkward feeling, that tends to mean you should not be doing it because you're just not ready. And give it to someone else. Maybe take more practice training or workshops. Get a mentor. Look at your interpreting friends and their work and their experiences. Analyze their skills and pick that up and try and integrate that with your own interpreting. From the deaf perspective, we want you to develop your skills as interpreters to be better in your services and have a positive experience. But you shouldn't make the deaf person feel uncomfortable. If that's happening with your interpreting, that's really impacting your deaf consumer. So think about that from that consumer's perspective and analyze your skills. Thank you.